Okay, and welcome to week 10, if I'm counting correctly, of the graphics and animation class. And today we are going to be introducing a third object in our series to talk about what you can do for the object assignment. And we talked about this before, but here we're going to put a fine point on it. And this is going to be the print object, meaning that here we're going to talk about printing on paper. We've already talked about 3D printing. We've already talked about some other aspects of this. So I wanted to go over this to make sure that you understood what I'm asking you to think about. Okay, so the print object workflow, because all of these objects and basically all of the things that you do in Lightwave or anything else in media for that matter have a workflow or a number of workflows that you can choose. And I'm choosing the simplest ones I can because honestly they don't have to be very complicated. So what I want to do is I want to review the workflows that we've talked about so far and kind of add the print workflow to it, because really we're almost done talking about the various types of objects you can create, and at this point you should be able to create most of them. Okay, the first workflow that we talked about was for the 3D printer. We also talked about the animated logo that you would see on television or something like that, and today we're going to talk about print. And so these are three workflows which cover most things. Now what we haven't talked about yet are multimedia and virtual reality. And those are basically going to be using much the same workflows as the ones we're talking about today. So to go over the 3D printer workflow, just to sort of put this in context. Basically in the 3D printer workflow, you're using the modeler program to create a 3D object. So let me just sort of highlight this. The modeler program creates the 3D object, and so that's your keychain, your whatever it is that you're making. It could be a solid object of some kind, a prototype for something, and then at some point you're exporting that as a single layer. And of course, if you're making something with moving parts, then you'd be doing this process for each part. And so the single layer then becomes an STL file. You must export it as an XTL file. Now you can use the OBJ file if the STL doesn't work, but stick with the STL if you can. And so then from there, you're taking that file, which is from Modeler. You're not using anything but Modeler. You're not going into layout. You're taking the STL file, going into the MakerBot desktop, which is available on all the computers, and if it isn't, you can download it from MakerBot. And there you're finalizing the print sizing, and you're previewing the thing, and then you're basically printing it. So if you're doing this away from the 3D printer, you would put that file, the final print file, onto a thumb drive, put it into the MakerBot machine, and then basically print it. And you can review that the videos on that subject if you need to. If you happen to be, well, we're almost got to the point where we got the system back up and running in the corner office. I'll be giving you a heads up when that is ready, and it makes it a little bit easier. Okay, the TV logo workflow. Basically, again, you're using the modeler program to make 3D objects, and that's all you're really using it for, which is all that you ever use it for, really. But the layout program is where you're arranging the objects, lights, and cameras to create an animation. So there you have whatever object you made in Modeler, maybe another object, and then you put the lights where you want them, set up the camera, how you want the audience to view the object, and then program the animation, what you want the object to do, what you want the lights to do, what you want the camera to do, and then you're exporting that as a series of still frames. And they should be PNG frames. That's the easiest one to work with. And then you take those frames and put them into an Adobe Premiere project, and then export the final version as an H.264 or MP4 file. And that's covered in the tutorials as well. And that's basically it for the TV workflow. Now for the print logo workflow, which I'm going to talk about now, again, you're using the same modeler program to create your 3D objects. Here, you're using your layout program. Now the only thing that's wrong with this slide is I left the word animation in there. You don't use it to make animation. Basically, you take your objects, your lights, and your camera. Chances are you're only going to be using one camera, and you're going to export one single frame, no animation. But this frame has to be in high resolution, which means you should actually be exporting it in greater resolution than high definition video because it's going to print and you know the help you can get. And Adobe Photoshop, you can edit your image in Adobe Photoshop if you feel it needs it, or you can bring it right into Adobe InDesign and to basically put it on paper the way you want it and export it to a PDF. Now from there, from Adobe InDesign, you're just going to Acrobat and printing it out on paper. Or basically, if you have the PDF, any computer that you find will probably have Acrobat on it. And then you can print that out. Or you can take it to Office Max and they'll print it out for you. But it should be in a PDF format because that's what paper recognizes. So, for print objects, what you want to think about, you can make a poster. In fact, I've seen some pretty elaborate posters done. You don't even have to necessarily confine yourself to 8.5 by 11. You can make a big picture if you want to. Adobe InDesign will handle any size you want to throw at it. It could be letterhead. It could be business cards. It could be a flyer. It could be a t-shirt. It could be a hat. You can use the same thing to make a custom hat. You may have to send it out to a company to have them embroider it on there, but it could be done. Or it could be one of those magnetic signs that you see people putting on their cars. So basically anything that you can imagine, you can do as long as it is print-based. And you can make some kind of a giveaway. That's what some people do. The idea is to have something ready. Okay, so if we're starting out in Modeler, here we have basically unlimited options here for creating objects. And so for this particular assignment, I'm going to keep this real simple. I always promise to do that, but this time I mean it, only because what we're trying to demonstrate is really the workflow. So what we produce isn't quite as important, but let's pretend that we want to do some kind of a logo. Okay, so let's say we have a program that we're making, a television show called In Focus, and it's basically a TV show of some kind. And let's keep it simple. We'll just do it as words only. And if I'm in the Create tab, I'm just going to go down to my logo thingy here, and I'm just going to type the word In Focus, and I'll put it in all caps. In Focus. Let's say that that's the name of my show. And so for the font, I will choose something that I know will be very simple, and that will be Impact. Impact is a really nice font, especially for news gathering or something like that. So if I say In Focus, then you can see over here, there is my logo, and it's actually produced quite well. Oops, excuse me. Let's move myself over here a little bit. Okay, good. So as you can see, there is my In Focus. Now you might wonder, why is it backwards over here? Well, the reason is because I was using the program to do something where I needed to see the other side of something. And so instead of having this set to back, I had it set to front. So I'll put it back to back. And so there, that is correct. Okay, so we're almost done here. All I want to do is what I usually do with text-based logos. I'm going to go into polygon mode, and I'm going to quickly grab that first polygon there, and I'm going to name that. I'm going to go Change Surface, and I'm going to call that Face. And in this case, since this is all we're really doing, I'm not going to bother naming the other surface. We'll just have one. And so what I will do is I will save this object, and I'm just going to call it, I'm just going to call this In Focus as one word. And if I hit save, that is saved. And so then immediately I go to the layout program, and if I bring that in, I'm going to load the object, and I'm just going to load In Focus, and there it is. So it couldn't really be all that simpler. So if we go over here, we can see, there is our In Focus sign. And so then all we got to do is make this palatable for whatever it is we're going to do. So we can do any number of things. Now let's say this is a news program, and so I want to put some news footage there in the front. I want to have some sort of an image going across the front of this. Now I've only got one surface called Face, and so we'll go across the whole thing. So let me try something here. So this just came to mind, so forgive me if I'm going a little off script here. So I am just going to go here. I'm just going to type the word crowd because I'm just thinking of some sort of a images of crowds. And wow, lots of crowds here. I just want a crowd with a lot of faces that look natural. So I'm just going to grab this one. So I have no idea who these people are, what they're cheering for, but the audience will never really see them. I'm just going to call it crowd. And then if I'm back here, I'm going to my surface editor, and this will be for the face surface. I'm going to map that into the face. So if I load an image, and I'll stick it with, and there's my crowd image. If I load it in, let's see what it does. Now right now, it's kind of mapping it into each letter. I wonder if I hit automatic sizing. That's actually more what I had in mind. And let's see what it looks like if I go into VPR. That's just about right. Now I could mess with it, but in this case I'm not really going to. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this image, and I will apply some luminosity to it. And you'll see when we get on with it that it's going to look rather interesting. And so that's going to be my face. And then the default surface, I'm going to choose my company color, which I tend to go with blue, so I'll go with blue. And I'm going to make that a luminescent blue. And I'm going to make it semi-transparent. I'm even going to give that a double-sided look, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay, so that's my logo. At least that's what I'm starting with. Now, if I go off VPR for a second, I'm seeing it now as an image. I'm going to go to where the camera is. So I'm going to go to Camera View, and that's what we're seeing. Now, this is pretty close. Now, I'm going to move the camera in a little bit. Right now, I've got the object itself. So I'm going to just shift camera. I'm going to move the camera in a little bit. And here, I'm going to do a few things that are unusual. First, what I want to do is I want to change the camera's focal length because I want to distort this. So I'm going to go to my camera properties, and there I'm going to change the focal length. I'm going to bring the focal length down so that I'm effectively zooming out. And so I'm going to then bring the camera in so we can see that effect. And then I'm going to bring the camera down so that we kind of look up at it. And let's see if we get a little bit more of this effect. And this could work against us, but I don't think it will, because we're seeing the back surface of this. So I'm going to do something a little bit unusual here. I'm going to close this because I think we're about done with it. I'm going to go back here for a second. I'm going to go and I am going to try something I normally wouldn't do. I'm going to, instead of deleting the back surface, I'm going to hit the F button, which would flip it. And the effect that does is it deliberately creates impossible geometry. And what it should do is make that disappear, but it doesn't look like it did. So let's just try deleting that. So if I delete it, there it is. And so that kind of fades it out. And so if I wanted to, I could even go back to camera properties and take it down even more. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Let's see what I do. And bring it in. I'm going to say that that's okay. That's kind of what I wanted to do. And of course, there's ways of tweaking it. Let's just go with this for now. Now, if you look at the image is 640 by 480. That's what this gray box is for. So if I go into camera properties again, you see 640 by 480. Now my instinct might be to go to 1920 by 1080, which would be high definition, which would actually be acceptable in this situation. But I want to give it a little bit more. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I don't need anywhere near as much height. because this doesn't have to be a rectangular television screen. So I'm going to double the resolution. I'm going to go to 4,000 pixels for the width. And I'm going to take that height down a little bit. Take that height down to, say, 800. 4,000 by 800. And that may be actually having the opposite effect, so let's make that 2,000. Because what I want to do is I want to get that shape closer. So if I'm looking at this now, if I move the camera in and move it down, let's say I try to get the same effect. So I come down a little, come up a little bit. Let's say instead of moving the camera down, I rotate it. Oop. I think I was doing it the wrong way. So still with camera. Oh, I see when I'm this close, I'm really distorting it. So I'm going to try one more way. Ooh, a lot of fun stuff going on there. Maybe I better stick to what I was doing before, only because I want to make sure we get this. So if I go back to move, I'm just going to just tilt it up just a little bit. And I'm going to say that that's about right. I want to keep that same perspective, but I want to at the same time have that space to work with. So I'm eventually going to get rid of this space in the bottom, but I want that shape as the final outcome. So bring it in just a little bit more, which is getting hard to do at this point. Okay. And that's going to be, that's what I'm going for. So that'll do it. So I want to basically print that out. And while I'm here, get me over here a little bit. So as you might imagine, all I got to do is hit the F9 button. So F9, and that will F9. And as you can see, the program is now rendering out that big image. So here it is. This is the big image. I'm just going to continue here. And so I'm going to do File, Save. I'm going to save this. And it's okay to use PNG. In fact, I'm going to use PNG 32, which will give us all of that necessary alpha channel. And I'm going to call this print_logo. So then, just to show you what you can do with this, if I go into Photoshop, and I'm going to open, and I open up Print Logo, you see that I have a completed logo that has that transparency. Now, I don't really have a problem with this. The only adjustment I'm going to make is I'm going to get rid of some of this unused space. So, if I were to just grab the part of the image that I want using the marquee tool. Now, this is a basic Photoshop stuff. In Photoshop, you got the marquee tool, the lasso tool. Really, this is not all that complicated. And I'm going to go up to the image menu, and I'm just going to hit crop. And so that will give us this. So we basically have the final image. Now, just to look at how big it is, the image size, that is basically 3,000 pixels wide, and that's really what we want. It could be bigger, but it really shouldn't be that much smaller than this. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And the next thing we'll do is we'll go to our InDesign program. And InDesign, we're going to make a letterhead. So if I go to InDesign, the opening screen basically gives you whatever projects you're working on. You can use InDesign to make labels. Just so you can see, this is this one isn't loaded. You can make label designs, and this was a CD cover. This was a DVD box label, and you can do all kinds of crazy things. But all we're going to do here is simply a letterhead. So if I hit Create New, and the reason why we have to go through this is so you can understand exactly what it is we are doing. I'm going to switch this to inches. And when I do that, you might see this familiar 8.5 by 11. 8.5 by 11 has to do with the sheet of paper that you're using. And so that's important to understand. Over here, orientation, we have portrait versus landscape. And so this would be an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, straight up and down. So if you wanted to make something that was sideways, you would use landscape. If you wanted to use a different sheet of paper, you would want to load a different preset or change it, and I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. So if I hit create, this is what you basically get. And I'm going to move myself over again to make sure that you can see these controls. There you go. So this is your piece of paper. Now, why is this so important? Because you're working on paper. The computer itself does not understand paper unless your program specifically does. So if we look over here, you'll see that this is letter size. You could choose any type of paper that you want. So I forced it to go to letter size. Legal size, if I were to go there, you can see that that will give you the longer legal paper, which is 8.5 by 14. You can go to tabloid, which would give you 11 by 17. And you could go to, these are European sizes, if you happen to know what those are, which we're not going to get into. Let's go back to letter size. And you can also customize it. You can change those if you're using some custom size, but that's basically it. So if you look up here at our rulers, because I told it I wanted to do with inches, it's 8.5 by 11. If you're more comfortable working with centimeters, you can too. But the important thing to understand is you put something 1 inch away from the edge there, that's where it's going to print out. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is we're going to place the image in here. Now I'm going to show you an easy way of doing that. If you look at your toolbox over here, now basically you got 2 arrows, and the way we're doing it, you'll understand in a minute. We really have to work with this first top one. So the top arrow selects things that you've got on your layout. This piece of paper becomes your layout. This box with the X through it allows you to place something in the box that you can move around later. And I'll show you why that's important. If I were to do a file place without the box, and I were to place my print logo, and it looks easy enough. When I do that, notice how big it is? That's because the computer doesn't understand what I want to do with this. So I'm going to delete this and do it a little differently. I'm going to grab this box, and I'm just going to drag a box that I think would be about the right size to start with. And I want the logo to appear in the box, but I don't want it to be bigger than the box. So once the box is selected, and I can select it with this arrow here, then the properties window over here is talking about the box. And so here, what I want to do is I want to put something in the box. So I'm going to import a file for the box. I'm going to grab my print logo, and I'm going to drop it in. Now at first it does the same thing, but I'm going to go to frame fitting, and I'm going to go to the second one, and you see that fits it nicely. And so that makes it a little bit easier to work with. Now to show you what you can do, you have the 2 arrows up here again. Now if I select the box, I can move the box like this. Now if I select the corner of the box, I'm cropping the information there. So that's all with this top arrow, this hollow arrow. Now the solid arrow, if I click on the content, this is the actual content. If I were to do that, I'm making the content bigger and smaller. So the brown rectangle covers that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the brown rectangle in this case first because it's more convenient. And I'm going to put that up there. Then I'm going to grab the hollow rectangle, and I'm just going to move my little cropping tool so that it's out of the way. And then I'm going to just grab the whole thing and just kind of stick it up here so we have letterhead. Now, if you're a designer and you're working with letterhead, one of the first things that you might notice is that a designer tends to be proud of their work, and so you make your work really big and gaudy. You really want to make this nice and small. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this, and I'm just going to make it small. Oop, it changed the proportions. Do not change the proportions. So It's about right. And I'm going to guess, even though it looks really small, that that will be big enough for a letterhead. And so I will also grab my text tool, and I'm just going to create a text box here, and I'm going to say in focus productions, and let's say so I give myself an address, and let's say I get a phone number. Whatever that phone number happens to be. And then I can take that text and I can choose a font. And I'm just going to go right to impact because that's what I used before. And I can make that a little bit larger. And in this case, I'm going to left-hand justify it. And so that becomes my letterhead. So if I'm writing a business letter, that's what I'm going to write with. And I'm going to save this as letterhead. But then I'm going to export it as a PDF. And I'm going to call this letterhead underscore X. And so then I get this dialog box, and basically high quality print is good enough, so I'm just going to export it as high quality print. There's a lot of other things that you can do with it, and there it is. And so here it is. If I double click on the PDF version, that's what I get. And so you can see I've got my logo and everything. I'm just going to go ahead and print that out. And so if I reach back here for my printer, let's see what I get. How about that, huh? And so this would be your finished logo letterhead. And so you could do this with anything else that you're designing on your paper, and it's as simple as that. Now, not to say that that was incredibly simple, but if you follow the steps, you can eventually get there, and that's what these steps are all about.